The member for Berowra.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I'm no fan of Telstra. If BHP is known as the big Australian, then surely Telstra is known as the big un-Australian because of its appalling treatment of its own customers. Unfortunately, we can't stop Telstra restructuring their business, but we do have the ability to ensure we can maintain ownership of Telstra and that in a restructured environment, Telstra, which is the Australian telecommunications company, maintains its obligations with respect to the Australian community. This bill ensures that in any restructure, Telstra's regulatory obligations, such as the current consumer protection obligations that exist, are reapportioned to the appropriate entity. It also provides a power for the Minister to respond to any future changes in Telstra's corporate structure by including or excluding Telstra entities as needed to apply the existing regulatory regime to them. The bill also includes a series of powers that would allow the Minister to direct a Telstra entity to assist another Telstra entity to fulfil a regulatory obligation or certain contractual obligations. This legislation will uphold Telstra's current regulatory obligations to Australians by maintaining regulatory equivalency for Telstra's successor entities. I wish we could have prevented Telstra's restructure until such time as it had improved mobile services to customers who pay its bills in communities like mine. I wish we could have prevented Telstra's restructure unless they improved their appalling customer service to all Australians. But unfortunately, Telstra doesn't need Parliament's approval for their restructure. However, without these legislative changes, we couldn't ensure that some of the important obligations imposed on Telstra would remain in force. Let's be clear, Telstra's restructure is not about better mobile service and it's not about better customer service. It's just about shareholder windfall. Unfortunately, there are no drivers for Telstra to improve its appalling customer service, and I'll return to this issue later in my remarks. Telstra's restructure splits the company into three separate legal entities under a parent company to be called Telstra Group. Infraco Fixed will own and operate their passive physical infrastructure assets, the ducts, fibre, data centres, subsea cables and exchanges that underpin their fixed telecommunications network. Infraco Towers will own and operate their physical mobile tower assets. And the corporate spin from Telstra says Servco will focus on how they create and innovate products and services for their customers and deliver the best possible customer service experience, whatever that means. The restructure raises issues beyond the poor performance of Telstra's mobile and customer service and their preternatural talent for spin-over delivery. As a member of the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security, I want to say something about telecommunications and our national security. Who controls our telecommunications companies is an increasingly important question. Australia needs to have Australian-owned telecommunications companies. This isn't a case of economic nationalism, it's because telecommunications infrastructure is critical infrastructure for Australia. We cannot allow malicious actors, including state actors, to access these networks and use our telecommunications infrastructure to harm our nation. Just last month, Mike Burgess, the Director-General of Security, said, and I quote, "I remain concerned about the potential for Australia's adversaries to pre-position malicious code in critical infrastructure, particularly in areas such as telecommunications and energy. Such cyber-enabled activities could be used to damage critical networks in the future." Mr Burgess says the attacks would undermine Australia's sovereignty, democratic institutions, economy and national security capabilities, while also warning espionage and foreign interference attempts by multiple countries remained unacceptably high. It's in this context we must be very careful about who controls and owns telecommunications infrastructure. I therefore welcome Minister Fletcher's actions in preserving the foreign ownership limits on Telstra and its successor companies through this bill. The arrangements in this bill prevent more than 35% of key Telstra subsidiaries being sold to a group of foreign interests. The bill maintains that the headquarter location of Telstra and its successor entities is in Australia, and prevents more than 5% of Telstra being sold to a single foreign person. This legislation is important to ensure Telstra remains in Australian hands and under Australian control. The foreign ownership arrangements for the bill align with the government's view that the appropriate oversight mechanisms must be maintained for Australia's critical telecommunications assets. This is particularly important given the role Telstra plays in the communications market in this country, essentially operating as a monopoly provider in many parts of the country. The Foreign Investment Review Board regime, which was enhanced by the Morrison government earlier this year, will also continue to protect our critical national assets, including our telecommunications networks. I want to say something about Telstra's tower business and what this legislation seeks to regulate. Nothing is more important to increasing competition and consumer choice in the telecommunications sector than providers sharing infrastructure, This is particularly when the infrastructure has been erected with public funds. It's vital, therefore, that obligations currently placed on Telstra, which requires them to provide other carriers with access to telecommunications transmission towers, apply in the same way post-restructure. A key set of obligations placed on Telstra is the facilities access regime, which requires that carriers provide other carriers with access to bottleneck infrastructure. The Tower Access Framework is designed to support competition in the telecommunications market by providing other telecommunications carriers with access to tower infrastructure. Telstra's restructure has revealed a loophole within the current Tower Access Framework, whereby they could potentially shift their tower assets to a subsidiary that they own to avoid their obligations. And given Telstra's history of being a monopoly provider and then as a private company continuing to behave like a monopolist, I think this issue is a real concern. Despite all the public subsidies Telstra receives, it fights every opportunity to increase competition and share its infrastructure with its competitors. On so many occasions when Telstra is asked to share, it lawyers up and fights proposals. Such behaviour has led one industry participant to remark that Telstra is a law firm masquerading as a telecommunications company. I'm pleased to say, therefore, that this bill addresses this issue and extends the framework so that all entities within a carrier group that meet a 15% ownership threshold must also provide access to telecommunications towers. The provisions in this bill will be dormant for the first 6 months following passage to allow the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission to undertake a review of the 15% ownership threshold and provide advice to the Minister for Communications. The bill seeks to ensure the current Tower Access Framework continues to apply, which in turn should promote competition and better telecommunications options for all Australians. It's critical that carriers can access each other's towers to provide the best possible service to customers. Any change could impact the connectivity and services available, which are already substandard in large parts of my electorate and in regional, rural and remote areas in Australia. Earlier this year, Telstra sold 49% of its tower business for $2.8 billion. The majority of these proceeds of the deal will go to shareholders, with only a very small proportion being invested into network improvements. I've condemned Telstra repeatedly for its failures to more substantially reinvest in rolling out more towers to provide services to those customers who keep paying its bills, and an increasing number of my colleagues across the country agree that this is a major problem. This bill is also important because if we don't get the regulations right, Telstra's restructure poses a risk that services Australians rely on might not be available. We could see Telstra stop maintaining the universal service obligation. We could see Telstra no longer required to meet important consumer safeguards, and we could see Telstra not required to provide the 000 emergency service facility that it provides, on which all Australians depend. This is something no one wants to see and a reason why the bill is so important. Despite significant change in the telecommunications industry over the last decade, Telstra still plays a key role in large parts of Australia. Its role has been reinforced by a range of regulated consumer service safeguards, including the universal service obligation, that guarantees delivery of basic telephone and payphone services in areas across Australia, as well as the operation of the 000 emergency call service. Delivery of the USO and the 000 service is further supported by a contract with Telstra, the Telstra USO Performance Agreement, which also provides for Telstra's ongoing use of copper to deliver telephone services. While Telstra has given clear and repeated undertakings that it will continue to deliver on these obligations, this bill makes sure they continue to operate by reapportioning them to ServCo. The bill also gives the Commonwealth visibility regarding the assets and contract ServCo needs to continue to deliver on these obligations, and a new ministerial directions power should the Commonwealth become concerned that Telstra may fail to fulfil these long-standing obligations. While Telstra has given undertakings that it will continue to deliver these obligations, the bill makes sure they follow through with their promise. To reinforce this, the bill provides powers for the Minister, and in some cases ACMA, to direct a Telstra subsidiary to meet its obligations or assist the delivery of obligations to another Telstra subsidiary. ACMA's directions power allows it to ensure its compliance and enforcement activities continue to apply to entities within the Telstra Group where satisfied that the relevant entity has failed, is failing or is likely to fail to fulfil an obligation. Similarly, the ministerial directions power allows the Minister to direct an entity to assist a Telstra successor company to fulfil obligations where the Minister, in this case, is of the view that the entity has failed, is failing or is likely to fail to meet that obligation. The powers also provide for a penalty for failure to comply with the direction. In short, the purpose of the bill is to maintain the Commonwealth's policy interest in protecting customers and promoting competition and supporting Telstra's public interest roles in Australia and our communication system, and ensuring that they are not diminished as a result of the restructure. It's for these reasons that I'm supporting the bill. I wanted to talk a little bit about some other matters that Telstra and the other telecommunications companies are involved in, because of course telco reform is more than just this bill. As I outlined, Deputy Speaker, I haven't had much good to say about Telstra, and with good reason. Telstra and NBN's failure to serve my constituents and their inaction to rectify terrible phone and internet reception is putting people's lives at risk. This is despite all of the public money on offer to support telcos investing in infrastructure. Telstra likes to remind us that they're just another public company, but they receive so much public money it's a hard claim to maintain in any real sense. A campaign we ran in the Barara electorate highlighting the parlous state of peri-urban mobile communications led to Minister Fletcher creating the pilot $16.4 million peri-urban mobile program, or PUMP, which is designed to address mobile black spots in bushfire-prone communities like mine on the edge of Australia's cities. PUMP will provide grant funding to mobile network operators and infrastructure providers to deploy new mobile phone infrastructure to address mobile coverage areas in peri-urban areas. I want to put on record my thanks to Minister Fletcher for his ongoing support to address issues faced by my constituents through programs like PUMP. Recent bushfires and floods have shown the importance of reliable mobile services during natural disasters. Now, shortly the PUMP guidelines will be released and this program will be opened. PUMP is a test for the telcos. In some respects, it's their last chance. Unlike the last round of the mobile black spot program, where the telcos applied for 0 towers, I repeat, 0 towers in my community, PUMP is their last chance to show whether they care about Australians in communities like mine. My message to Telstra and the other telcos is, if you want to show you are serious, apply for lots of towers in my community and others under PUMP. The Morrison government has done its job by putting money on the table to support telco investment in infrastructure. It's time the telcos did their job and delivered telco services to people across the country who are paying their bills. Now, the alternative future for the telco sector has been outlined in my private member's bill, the Telecommunications Reform, Telstra, NBN and Other Providers Bill 2021, currently on exhibition as an exposure draft released by me recently and supported by 18 colleagues from right across the country. A growing number of colleagues are telling me that they too support the aims of my private member's bill. It's a bill designed to create better infrastructure, better customer service and more accountability for telecommunications companies. But unfortunately, the response from the telco sector shows that they just don't take these issues seriously. The telco response should surprise no one. They effectively said two things. First, there's nothing to see here. They think they're doing a great job. And secondly, that the bill asks far too much of them. What the telco sector has failed to do is to recognise that there is a real problem. If there wasn't a real problem, why would 18 members of parliament from across the country band together to try and achieve real change? My bill has been welcomed by consumer groups. Choice's Alan Kirkland said, and I quote, "It's unacceptable for people who live in a major city like Sydney not to have mobile coverage in their home, and even worse in a bushfire-prone area. We find it puzzling that the telco industry, particularly Telstra, has been able to get away with substandard service for so long," Mr Kirkland said. Professor Alan Fells, former chairman of the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, agreed more needs to be done in the telco space. He says, and I quote, "For many years the telco industry has failed to make access to mobile phone services universally available, even in a number of suburbs. Yet such access is an essential service and vital in emergencies. After waiting for so long, it is clear that the only solution is legislation backed by sanctions compelling it." Those are the words of Professor Alan Fells. Phone and internet are an essential service that Australians rely on. On a good day, connectivity problems make people seethe with anger, and on a bad day, it's simply, Deputy Speaker, a matter of life and death. The response from the public has shown me we're on the right track, and I will continue to fight for better telco services for my community. In conclusion, Deputy Speaker, I wish that Telstra would restructure their business so they actually improved service for customers who are paying their bills, not the size of their executives' pay packets. Telecommunications are more important now than ever. The COVID-19 pandemic has changed the way we live and work, the way we study, the way we access healthcare, the way we stay in touch with our loved ones. Unlike Labor, the Coalition has improved telecommunications in many communities across Australia in delivering the Mobile Black Spot program and soon to be the announced peri-urban mobile program. This bill ensures that the already hard-won gains and accountabilities applying to Telstra are maintained, and I commend the bill to the House.